Welcome to Moonlit Scarecrow. New horrors await you every night. So before the darkness takes over, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because some stories are best heard in the dead of night. Now, let's begin. I still wake up in cold sweats some nights, my lungs burning as if I'm still underwater. It's been 2 years since that spring break in Cancun, but the memory hasn't faded, not even a little. I'd saved for months to afford that trip with my roommates, Kyle, Jared, and Marcus. We were all certified divers, but I was the least experienced of the group. Still, when they suggested we book a boat to take us to some less touristy dive spots, I didn't hesitate. Why would I? I wanted to prove I could hang with the veterans. The captain was a local guy named Miguel who spoke decent English. His boat wasn't fancy, weathered fiberglass with peeling paint, but it looked seaworthy enough. When Kyle mentioned wanting to explore some caves, Miguel seemed hesitant but agreed after Kyle slipped him an extra $100. Only if conditions good, Miguel had said. And you stay together. We set out early, the sea calm and the sky cloudless. 2 hours later, we were approaching a small rocky island with sheer cliffs. Miguel pointed to a spot near the base. There. Underwater cave system, very beautiful, but very dangerous. He looked at us seriously. 1 hour only. Stay together. We were buzzed with excitement as we geared up. The water was crystal clear, revealing a vibrant reef about 40 feet down. As we descended, schools of tropical fish scattered around us. Under different circumstances, I would have stopped to appreciate the beauty, but the guys were already swimming toward the cave entrance, a dark gash in the rock face. I followed them in, switching on my flashlight. The cave opened into a large chamber with multiple tunnels branching off. Shafts of sunlight penetrated from somewhere above, creating ethereal blue beams in the water. It was breathtaking. We explored together for about 20 minutes, staying within sight of each other. But then Kyle signaled toward a narrow passage that seemed to lead deeper. Marcus shook his head and pointed at his watch. Kyle shrugged and turned toward the passage anyway. Jared hesitated, looked at us, then followed Kyle. Marcus and I exchanged glances. I could read the conflict in his eyes even through his mask. We were supposed to stay together. Reluctantly, we followed. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for our tanks. It twisted downward, getting darker as we went. My chest tightened with every foot of descent. Finally, it opened into another chamber, smaller than the first. Kyle was already examining a crevice that might lead further. That's when I felt the current. It was subtle at first, just enough to make me work harder to stay in place, but it was strengthening. Marcus noticed it too. I could tell by the way he suddenly became alert, looking around. He tapped his watch emphatically and pointed up. Kyle waved him off and kept examining the crevice. Jared seemed torn. The current grew stronger. My heart rate spiked as I realized what was happening. Tidal flow. Water was pouring into the cave system as the tide rose. Marcus grabbed Kyle's arm, his movements urgent now. Kyle finally seemed to get it. We turned to exit, but the current was noticeably stronger. Swimming back through the passage was like fighting a river. My breathing quickened, using up my air faster. The passage seemed longer, narrower than before. I was third in line. Marcus led, then Jared with Kyle behind me. Halfway through, Jared's tank got wedged in a narrow section. Panic flashed in his eyes as he struggled. Marcus turned back to help, but couldn't reach past Jared. I was stuck behind them, with Kyle pushing at my feet, growing more desperate by the second. When Jared's regulator got knocked out of his mouth, everything happened in horrifying slow motion. His reflexive gasp sucked in water instead of air. His body convulsed. Marcus grabbed for him, but the current pulled Jared deeper into the crevice. Somehow, I still don't remember exactly how, Marcus managed to pull us back into the chamber we'd left, but Jared was gone, swept away by the current. Our air was running low. The passage was now a death trap with the strengthening current. Marcus pointed to another tunnel on the opposite side of the chamber. A gamble. It might lead out or deeper in. We had no choice. That tunnel was wider but twisted confusingly. My air gauge was in the red. Kyle was right behind me, his eyes wide with panic behind his mask. Marcus kept checking back, urging us on. Just as my lungs began burning for air, the tunnel brightened. We exploded out onto the reef, our emergency ascent sending bubbles boiling to the surface. Miguel and the local Coast Guard searched for hours. They found Jared's body the next day, wedged in a crevice 90 feet down. I haven't dived since. Kyle and Marcus haven't either, as far as I know. We barely spoke on the flight home and haven't kept in touch. Sometimes I think about reaching out, but what would I say? That I still hear the sound of rushing water in my dreams? That I still see Jared's face in that final moment of terror? Some experiences bond people together forever, others shatter everything beyond repair. That was the last spring break I ever took. We'd been driving for 17 hours straight, trading shifts behind the wheel of Jesse's ancient Jeep Cherokee. 4 college juniors heading to Panama City Beach for spring break. Me, Jesse, Damon, and Chris. The GPS said we still had 3 hours to go, and the sun was already setting behind the dense pine forests of rural Florida. "This is taking forever," Chris groaned from the back seat. "We're missing the first night's party." Jesse, who was driving, tapped the GPS screen. "Hang on, I think there's a shortcut." I was half asleep in the passenger seat but opened one eye. "What shortcut?" "Through these back roads. Could save us at least an hour." Damon leaned forward. "Let's do it. I'm dying to get there." I had a weird feeling as Jesse made the turn onto a narrow 2-lane road that cut through thick forest. But I said nothing. We were all tired, all eager to start our vacation. What was the worst that could happen? The road grew narrower, the trees pressing in from both sides. The asphalt gave way to gravel, then hard-packed dirt. Jesse slowed down as we hit potholes, the Jeep's suspension groaning. "You sure about this?" I asked, after we passed a rusted sign riddled with bullet holes. "GPS says it's fine," Jesse replied, though he didn't sound convinced anymore. It was fully dark now, our headlights the only illumination for miles. No streetlights, no houses, not even another car. Just wilderness, and the increasing sense that we'd made a mistake. When the engine started making a clicking sound, we all tensed. "That doesn't sound good," Damon said. Jesse tapped the fuel gauge. "We're good on gas." But his voice had an edge to it. The clicking grew louder, then came a loud pop, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal grinding on metal. The Jeep lurched, and Jesse fought to keep it on the road. "Shit," he yelled as we skidded to a stop. "Something broke." We piled out with our phone flashlights. The right front wheel was tilted at an unnatural angle. Even I could see that the axle had snapped. "Can we fix it?" Chris asked. Jesse shook his head. "No way, we need a tow." That's when we realized none of us had cell service, not a single bar between the 4 of us. "I thought you said this was a shortcut," I said, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. "It is," Jesse insisted, showing me the GPS. But the blue dot that represented our location was in the middle of nowhere, the nearest town miles away. "So, what do we do?" Damon asked. "We walk," Chris said. "Find help, or at least cell service." We grabbed our backpacks, water bottles, and a flashlight each. Jesse locked the Jeep, a pointless gesture in retrospect, and we started walking in the direction the GPS said would lead to civilization. An hour later, we were still walking. The night had grown unseasonably cold, and strange sounds echoed from the forest around us. Not animal sounds, at least not entirely, more like machinery. Distant engines, maybe. "I think I see lights," Damon said suddenly, pointing ahead. He was right. Through the trees, maybe half a mile away, yellow lights glowed. We picked up our pace, relief washing over us. The dirt road ended at a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond it stood what looked like an old industrial complex, low concrete buildings with few windows. A sign on the fence read, "Private property trespassers will be prosecuted." "What is this place?" I whispered, though I'm not sure why I felt the need to be quiet. "Who cares?" Chris said. "They'll have a phone." We followed the fence until we found a gate. It wasn't locked. That should have been our first warning. The compound was eerily silent as we approached the nearest building. No people, no vehicles, just those yellow lights casting long shadows. The main door was metal, with a keypad beside it. To our surprise, it swung open when Damon pushed it. Inside was a long corridor lit by fluorescent tubes. The floor was concrete, stained dark in places. The air smelled of chemicals and something else, something organic and unpleasant. "Hello?" Jesse called out. His voice echoed back at us. "Anyone here?" No answer. "Let's find an office or something," Chris suggested. "There has to be a phone." We moved deeper into the building, passing locked doors with small windows. Through one, I glimpsed what looked like medical equipment. Through another, rows of empty cages. "Guys," I said, "I think we should leave. This feels wrong." "We need help," Jesse insisted. "Our phones don't work, remember?" That's when we heard it. A door opening somewhere ahead of us, followed by footsteps. We froze. "Hello?" Damon called out. The footsteps stopped. Then came a voice, clinical and detached. "How did you get in here?" A man in a white lab coat appeared around the corner. He looked ordinary enough, middle-aged, balding, glasses, but something in his expression made my skin crawl. "Our car broke down," Jesse explained. "We need to use a phone." The man studied us for a long moment. Then he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he said. "Follow me." He led us to an office with a desk and computer. An old landline phone sat on the desk. As he picked it up and dialed, I noticed framed certificates on the wall. They bore a logo I didn't recognize and words like experimental protocols and human subject research. "What kind of facility is this?" I asked. The man paused, phone to his ear. "Research. Agricultural mostly." I didn't believe him, neither did Damon, judging by his expression. "They'll send someone for you," the man said after a brief conversation. "But it might be a while, hours possibly." "We'll wait by our car," Chris said quickly. The man shook his head. "It's cold out there, and these woods aren't safe at night. You should stay here." Before we could respond, the door behind us opened. 2 more men in lab coats stood there. They were larger, more imposing than the first. "These young men need accommodations for the night," the first man told them. "Prepare room 4. Something in his tone made my heart race. I looked at my friends and saw the same realization dawning on their faces. Whatever this place was, whatever these men were doing here in the middle of nowhere, we weren't going to be allowed to leave. We never made it to Panama City Beach. Sometimes I wonder if anyone ever reported us missing, if anyone ever came looking. But mostly, I wonder how many other spring breakers took wrong turns over the years, ending up as unnamed subjects in experiments no ethics board would ever approve. I'm still here, we all are, in a manner of speaking. And now we understand what those stains on the floor were, the ones I thought looked like dried blood when we first walked in. I was right. The house looked perfect online. 4 bedrooms, oceanfront view, private beach access, all for a surprisingly reasonable rate. Too reasonable, as I'd later realize. But when you're planning a spring break trip with 3 weeks' notice, you take what you can get. There were 6 of us. Me, my best friend Trevor, his girlfriend Allie, my roommate Derek, and 2 girls from our sociology class, Megan and Jess. We pooled our money for the Gulf Shores rental, a rambling beach house built in the 70s that the listing described as rustic charm with modern amenities. The first red flag appeared when we arrived. The property manager was nowhere to be found, just a lockbox with a note. Enjoy your stay, no parties. No noise after 10 p.m. Do not enter the basement. Standard stuff except for that last part. The house didn't look like it had a basement. It was built on stilts like most beach houses. Weird, Trevor said, reading over my shoulder. Maybe it's just the utility room or something. We chose rooms, unpacked, and headed straight for the beach. It was perfect spring break weather. Warm sunshine, light breeze, waves rolling in gently. For a few hours, the house's oddities were forgotten. That night, we grilled on the deck, drank beer, watched the sunset. Everything was great until about midnight when Trevor nudged me. "Do you hear that?" he asked. At first I didn't. Then I caught it. A faint thumping sound, rhythmic and persistent. Like someone hammering, but muffled. "Probably just the pipes," Derek said. "Old house like this." But it continued all night. By morning, we were irritable from lack of sleep. The property listing had no reviews, I realized. Another red flag I'd missed in our rush to book. During breakfast, Jess pointed out something else strange. A door under the stairs that we hadn't noticed before. It was painted the same color as the wall, with no handle, just a keyhole. "That must be the basement," Derek said. "I thought beach houses didn't have basements," Megan replied. "The water table's too high." Curious, I pressed my ear to the door, nothing. But when I stepped back, I noticed a dark stain at the bottom edge, something that looked suspiciously like dried blood. "It's probably just rust," Trevor said. "This place is right on the ocean. Everything rusts." But I couldn't shake the unease. That day we tried to enjoy ourselves, swimming, sunbathing, walking to a nearby bar for lunch. But when we returned, Trevor's laptop was missing from his room. "Did you move it?" he asked Allie. She hadn't. None of us had been in his room. We searched everywhere. It was definitely gone, along with Jess's gold necklace, about $200 in cash from Derek's wallet. "Someone broke in," Allie insisted, growing hysterical. "We need to call the police." I tried calling the property manager. No answer. I sent an email. No response. That night, the thumping returned, louder this time. And now there was another sound beneath it, something that might have been a voice. "We should leave," Megan whispered. The 6 of us were huddled in the living room, no one wanting to sleep alone. "It's after midnight," I said. "Where would we go? And we've already paid for the week." It was a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. Around 3 a.m., Allie woke us up screaming. Trevor was gone. His side of the bed was empty, the sheets rumpled as if he'd been dragged out. We searched the house frantically, no sign of him. His car was still in the driveway, his phone still on the charger. The front door was locked from the inside. "The basement," Derek said suddenly. "He must have gone down there." We approached the door under the stairs. The stain at the bottom seemed larger now, fresher. "We need to get this open," I said. It took Derek 15 minutes to pick the lock with a paperclip. When the door finally swung open, stale air rushed out, carrying with it a smell I'll never forget, like meat left too long in the sun. There was no light switch that we could find. Derek shone his phone light down a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. The walls were bare concrete, glistening with moisture. The thumping sound was louder now, unmistakable. "Trevor?" Allie called down. Her voice echoed back at us. No one wanted to go first. Finally, I volunteered. Each step creaked under my weight. The others followed, our phone lights creating eerie, shifting shadows. The basement was much larger than I'd expected, extending beneath the entire house. It shouldn't have been possible, not in a beach house, not with the water table so high. Yet, here it was. Our lights revealed rusted metal shelves lining the walls, stacked with mason jars filled with cloudy liquid. In each jar floated something that looked disturbingly like human tissue. Fingers, eyes, what might have been sections of intestine. "What the fuck?" Derek whispered beside me. In the center of the room stood an old metal table, the kind you'd see in a morgue. Dark stains covered its surface and the floor beneath it. But no Trevor. The thumping grew louder. We followed the sound to another door, this one metal and secured with a padlock. "We need to get out of here," Jess said, her voice shaking. "We need to call the police. Now." She was right, but Allie was already moving toward the locked door. "Trevor?" she called. "Are you in there?" A muffled sound came from behind the door. It might have been his voice. Derek found a heavy wrench on one of the shelves. With a few powerful swings, he broke the padlock off. The smell that rushed out when the door opened was indescribable. Decay and chemicals and something else. Something primal that triggered every fight or flight instinct in my body. Our lights revealed a smaller room with shelves of surgical equipment, and in the corner, someone crouched over a body on the floor. Not Trevor. Someone else. Thin, pallid, with patches of hair missing from their scalp. They turned to look at us, their movements jerky, unnatural. Their eyes were milky white, pupils contracted to pinpoints. They smiled, revealing teeth filed to sharp points. Behind them lay Trevor, unmoving, a deep surgical cut running from his throat to his abdomen. The person, if they were still a person, lunged at it with surprising speed. Derek swung the wrench reflexively, connecting with their head. They dropped but kept moving, crawling toward us, still smiling. We ran, up the stairs, through the house, out the front door. We didn't stop until we reached our cars. The police found nothing when they arrived. No basement door, no jars of preserved specimens, no surgical table, no body, and no sign of Trevor. They treated it as a missing persons case, suggested that Trevor had gone for a late-night swim and drowned, but they never found his body. The house listing disappeared from all rental sites. When we tried to find the property manager, we discovered the name and contact information were fake. The house itself stood empty when we drove by a month later, a for sale sign in the yard. Sometimes I dream about that basement, about what might have happened if we'd arrived a few minutes earlier, or about what was really in those jars. But mostly, I wonder about who or what was renting out that house, and how many spring breakers before us had ventured down those stairs that shouldn't have existed. Spring break is supposed to be about making memories. But some memories you spend the rest of your life trying to forget.